Hi and welcome to Military Diorama. Today's build is going to be of a specific Tiger tank, and it was one of the first Tigers to be sent to Russia. It is tiger123 of the 503rd Sphere Abteilung. I have some reference photos and I'll link those below in the description. As you can see, some are winter camouflage and some are non-winter camouflage. From what I've seen of the photos, I'm pretty confident they're the same vehicle. I reviewed the kit in an earlier video and it's not that accurate, or the details aren't that crisp, but for this build it's going to be perfect because I have to do quite a lot of modifications to it anyway. So let's start the build. I'll start with the turret as there's more corrections needed on the turret. Not so much corrections, but the details are very soft. I'm removing some weld beads and some of the joints in the turret here, which I'll replace with plastic card. I also need to remove the escape hatch on the right hand side and replace it with a pistol port. Again, the pistol ports are a little bit small, or lacking, not small so much, but they're not very deep, so I'm going to make those stand off more. It's my first time doing weld beads, so this should be quite an interesting experiment for me. I'm going to be using stretch sprue as I haven't got the right sort of putty to do it with putty. First I remove the detail with a sharp knife, and then I'll sand it down with an emery board and make the grooves in the plastic for the weld beads to go into. I can still see where the weld bead is. I haven't taken it completely down. I'll mark it with a ruler to get a straight edge, and then once I've scored it, I'll increase it using the edge of the scalpel blade to to widen the groove. After I've done that, I cut some styrene sheet to the correct size, which I measure off the other half. I'll do quite a long strip and then I can use it with both sides. I glue that to the side of the turret and then I start stretching some sprue. I normally use a tea light for this, but I couldn't find my tea light, so I used a blowtorch. I'm actually using different sprue because I'm replacing the gun mantlet off the kit with a dragon one, and I'm using the dragon sprue. There's no particular reason, it just means I can see it easier on the kit because it's a different colour. But the reason I'm changing the mantlet is because the dragon one is better quality and it's more accurate than the academy one. Once I've stretched the sprue, I attach it to the required area with some Tamiya extra thin, then cut it roughly to length. Then I will soften it with glue and put the weld texture in it with the edge or the end of the knife. You might need a couple, 3 or 4 passes with the glue just to get it soft enough. Don't use too much because you'll soften the surrounding area as well. But I also need to add rolled metal texture to the turret, so I'll do that after I've done the weld beads. Once I've got that sorted on both sides, I move on to filling in the escape hatch cover. I cut a piece of styrene sheet, the same sheet I used for the additions on the turret, and I'm going to glue this on the inside using super glue. The only reason I'm using super glue is because it dries quicker and allows me to work sooner. I remove the escape hatch from the sprue, take the hinge off it and trim the edges down, test fit it into the hole, make sure it's not too flush, and then when I'm happy with it, I will glue it in place with some Tamiya white glue, which is quite slow setting but it will fill the gap quite well, and I'll move on to doing the pistol ports while that sets. I also clamp it to keep it in place, and because it's on a curve it will keep the shape better. Next I glue both pistol ports to some plastic card. It's the same thickness that I've been using for the rest of the parts on the turret. I glue it and clamp it so they stick to the curve, so the plastic on the back of it is the same profile as the plastic on the front. I double it up, but between the layers I cut out the actual pistol port recess on the first layer of plastic card, but not on the second. It's just because the detail's a little soft and it will just make it stand out a bit better, and it's just looks better, what I think it does anyway. I'm not really sure how accurate it is, it's just that I felt looking at pictures and the kit parts, it was just wasn't deep enough, so that's why I chose to stand it off with plastic card. With the major modifications to the turret done, I move on to the grenade launchers. I selected appropriate drill bit and just hollow them out a little bit more to make the walls a bit thinner, and then I mount some photo etch onto the grenade launcher holder. There's a little hole in there for each of the grenade launchers. I drill through that with a 0.4mm drill bit. I also flatten off the back of the smoke discharger and drill the hole through, tie a knot in some wire, which is 4mm, and put some super glue on it and pass it through the grenade launcher, then apply super glue to the back of the grenade launcher and pull the wire through the smoke discharger mount until it's all the way down and in place. Allow that to dry and then do that with all three. Do that on both sides, and then mount the smoke discharger launchers onto the bracket that I've glued onto the turret. Then once the glue has gone off on the smoke dischargers, I drill a hole in the top of the turret where the wires would go through for the smoke dischargers and pass the wire through, super gluing it to the top of the turret. Just a nice little added detail. Next I'll move on to the rear stowage bin. On this particular tank it's got a Panzer IV rear stowage bin. I've got another kit in my stash which I'll be building shortly, which is an initial production Tiger from Dragon, and you can do, there's 3 versions. There's one with this turret bin on, there's the Dumbo turret bin, which is 2 turret bins either side, which is the one that I'll be making out of that kit. But for this instance I've used the rear stowage bin off that kit for this kit. I find the early Tigers quite fascinating because of the amount of differences that you see in them, especially the ones that went to Tunisia and also the early ones that went to Russia. There's quite a few with different stowage bins before they standardised the actual rear stowage bin. There's just lots of variations on the initial Tigers that I think are nice. I did have a photo etch storage bin for this kit, but I was looking through my stash looking for where the holes for the smoke discharger cables went. Couldn't find them, then remembered that I had this storage bin, so I've used it on this kit, it's just quite a nice storage bin, quite highly detailed, and it's got the right brackets for a Tiger as opposed to using one out of a Panzer IV that has got Panzer IV mounts. After the turret bin has been done, I fitted the turret. Quite straightforward. It's a nicely detailed turret bin, but those are pretty much all the modifications now to the turret that I'm going to do. I did replace the handles on the hatches with wire because the ones supplied were very oversized. I tried doing wild beads. First I did them with stretch sprue. They turned out okay. I tried doing some with milliput, which didn't turn out as well, so I reverted to the stretch sprue technique. I was going to do the weld around the outside of the top of the turret, but chose not to because I didn't think I could do a good enough job of it with the stuff that I had. Overall I'm pleased with the result of the turret. The conversion on the back right side for the pistol port has worked out quite well. It looks quite good. I'm glad I spaced the pistol ports off. They look a lot better than they would have done being the flat things that came in the kit. I'm a little disappointed with the wild beads, but overall it's quite a good construction. I'm quite pleased with it. It's quite a nice kit, to be fair. It's a good kit for a beginner. I don't think I would build it straight out the box because for me it's lacking a little bit of detail and finesse, but for a quick build or just to get your mojo back after a hard build, it would be quite a nice kit to do. The detail is quite crisp on the turret hatches, and the parts you get for the handles and the catch mechanism is good. Overall it's a good solid kit. Just I prefer more detailed kits than this. It's fine for the conversion that I've done, and I think it will work out quite well. Here are some stills of the turret so you can see the modifications that I've done and the progress I've made. After I finish doing the turret, I move on to the lower hull. I'm working on the side here. I'm marking out the position of the little mounting clips for the side skirts. I'm either using photo etch or I might make my own side skirts, I'm not sure yet. But there's little squares that the bolts go into for the side skirts. There's 4 for each side skirt. They're not very high up, they're not very big either, but I'm going to just mark out where they are now, then drill a hole through. So once I've textured the surface, I can still locate the squares in the right place, but it's easier to do that than texture the surface with them on. I cut the squares out using the same thickness of plastic card that I've been using for the rest of the build. It's about 1/2 mil I think in thickness. Just cut out some little squares. I'll glue them on after I've textured it, and then I'll just trim them up so they're all square. I've got to make sure they're all level as well, they go in a nice run. But I'll do that, I'll put the first and the last one on, then use a ruler to position the rest. You won't be able to see them, but it's just good practice, because I'm pretty sure I'm going to have all 4 of the skirts on each side of the tank, which means they'll be covered up, or to a certain extent anyway, or I might have one that's got a few bolts missing and I can drill through and it gives a bit more detail. The hole was drilled with a 0.4mm drill bit in a pin vise. I'm going to be using a hole punch to punch out the bolts to go onto the side skirts, or I might try and rescue the ones off the kit side skirts if they look any good. I just attach them to the hull using extra thin cement and position them just so they're all in a straight line. Once that's done, I move on to the suspension. I want it to look like it's moving, so I'm going to position the suspension arms with a sag towards the back. So what I've done is removed all of the locating pins off the swing arms apart from the first one, and I'll glue the back swing arm in using a bit of plastic card for a spacer. Won't glue the plastic card, just be there loose, and I'll glue the front one in on the locating pin, and then once they're dry, put the other ones in and glue them. Just line them up with the ruler and do that on both sides. It just gives the vehicle a nice sag and it looks like it's moving because it's got weight moved to the back. With the majority of the turret done, I need to go back over and sort the texture out a little bit in places, but it's mainly done now. I'm going to move on to the lower hull. I start off by marking out the positions of the tow cable clamps. Now, the tow cable they give you with the kit is got the clamps in the wrong position, as far as I know. So I googled a reference picture and got a good idea of where the actual clamps go. I'm going to be using some resin clamps, which I'll show you a picture of now. They're from MJ Miniatures and they're 3D printed resin, I believe. They got quite a large range. They're very highly detailed. They do need to be stuck on with super glue. There's probably enough in there to do 8 Tiger tanks. They do different sets with different tool clamps for different vehicles. They also do US and Allied vehicles. I marked out the position of the clamps with using the original cable off that vehicle, and then marked on where the cable went to. But then also using the reference image, I had to move some of the markers because some of the clips were different. The kit comes with photo etch for the tow cable, not the tow cable, sorry, the track cable, but not for the track cable that would have been on that vehicle. So that's what I'm using the resin ones for. I'll also use them on the upper hull, although they do give you the clamps for the tow cables in the kit, which is separate to the actual tow cable, which is a nice touch. They're printed in blocks of 4, so I cut a block of 4 out and then changed the blade in my knife and cut off the ones that are required using the fresh blade, because it's important to get a nice clean cut. Next I move on to the rear plate. There's quite a few holes I've got to fill because of the things I'm not putting on, like the air filters and the heat shields on the exhausts. I go through the instructions, find out where the holes are, then mark the holes off on the back plate, and I'm going to stretch some sprue out using a candle and then fill the holes with the sprue and gluing them in. I find it easy doing this because you haven't got to worry about backing it off when you put the filler in, because if sometimes you put filler in a hole, when you sand it, it pops right out again. So I just find it slightly easier and also a bit quicker. Once I fill the holes in, I also remove some of the extra detail off the rear plate that I don't need, and then sand that down with a smooth sanding stick and run some extra thin over just to smooth it out. Once all that's done, I fit the parts for the exhaust pipe together and clean them up, drill it through the hole in the top where the exhaust is actually hollow, and texture it with some AK interactive texture. AK interactive hull text. I also do the same on the manifold or the cast covers of the exhaust, just to give it a bit more character. This kit's taken quite a bit of time to do because of all the modifications, but if you plan out what you're doing ahead, you can do one part while that part's drying, you then do the other part. It just speeds up the process a little bit, and it's worth it in the end. After I've finished off on the exhaust and the back plate, I've got to make a mount for a jerry can. There's a reference picture which I'll put up in a minute. It looks like they've used the rack off the toolbox and the bout that held the air filter on to use that as a makeshift jerry can rack, which you'll see here. I scratch build that out of some plastic card and just glue it to the back of the tank. It's a nice little detail, and that's one of the reasons I like these Eastern front tanks, because the earlier tanks have a lot of modifications that they've been done in the field, and also when they change parts in the factory they don't always make it onto the tank. So for example, the smoke dischargers was changed from being on the side to being on the hull, the S-mines, and there's a picture I've got of a tank where you've got the ones on the turret and the ones on the hull, which is, you'd never normally see that on a factory built tank. It's just, they've got a lot of character, and I'm quite interested in the early Tunisian Tigers and the the Eastern front Tiger tanks. That's pretty much the last of the modifications. I just continue building the rest of the tank. I get the majority of the upper hull done, which I haven't shown in this video. I've still got the running gear to do, but all in all I've probably done 90% of the tank. It is just the running gear and the tracks to do, I think, and some little bits and bobs on the back. I've also replaced the grab handles on the back plate with wire, and I've also modified the air intake, which would have the air filters attached to them, but because it hasn't, there's a hole which doesn't look right, so I've put a plastic tube over it so it looks like an actual tube for the intake. As ever, I hope you've enjoyed the video. It's been a little bit longer than usual because it's quite an in-depth conversion. If you have enjoyed the video and want to see more content like this, then please subscribe, leave a like, leave a comment. Everything will be welcome. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll leave you with some stills. See you next week. Thanks, bye.